Today we're going to take what we applied the last 2 days, simplifying radicals, and put it into the quadratic formula and solve for the x-intercept. So I wrote down the quadratic formula for you, in case you forgot. The negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So some of you may be asking yourselves, what are a, b, and c? Well, it's 8, negative 12, and 2. A is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant, the number that's by itself in your standard form of the equation that I've given you an example of here. All right, so you just substitute those numbers into that formula and start doing the math and start solving them. So negative b, well, b is negative 12, so it's the negative of negative 12, which would be positive 12. So it's positive 12 plus or minus negative 12 squared, and when you square negative, you get a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. So I've already done the math for you. Negative 12 squared is positive 144. And then it's minus 4 times 8 times 2, A and C, all over 16, because it's 2 times A. Now we have to finish up the math inside the square root symbol, and that's why I had you do the lessons that you did the last 2 days, because that's going to help you simplify that radical. So first it's 144 minus 64, because it's 32 times 2 is 64. So 144 minus 64 is 80. So it's 12 plus or minus the square root of 80 all over 16. All right, so far not so bad. Now we have to simplify the square root of 80. And some of you in the last 2 days' homework have been giving me a decimal answer for this. Like 80 is just a little bit less than the square root of 81. The square root of 81 is a perfect square. It's 9. 9 times 9 is 81. So if I said, what's the square root of 81? You would say 9. Square root of 80 is a little bit less than that. So if you're reducing this down to a decimal, it'd be like 8.9. But that's not what we're going to do. We are going to simplify it, not estimate it. When you turn a square root into a decimal, you're estimating it. When you simplify it, there's still a square root symbol in your answer. So what multiplies to give 80? A bunch of different things. 2 times 40, 8 times 10. There's a bunch of examples, but we want the one that, or I like to do it the way that you pick the two numbers that multiply to give 80, where one of them is a perfect square. So like 4 or 9 or 16, 25, 36. Remember the diagonal on the times table, the perfect squares. And pick the biggest one. There's actually a couple that go into 80. 4 goes into 80, but 16 also goes into 85 times. And that's the biggest perfect square that goes into 80. So that's what I'm going to use to break down the square root of 80. So I'm going to say the square root of 80 is the square root of 16 times the square root of 5. Now, as I showed you the last couple days, you could have picked 8 and 10 or 4 and 20 and broke it all the way down to prime factorization and end up with the same answer that I'm about to get. But I'm running out of room on my slate, and this is quicker. If you use the biggest perfect square, which is 16, the square root of 16 is 4, the whole number 4. Square root of 5, it doesn't break down any farther, it's square root of 5. So the square root of 80 reduces to 4 square root 5, because the square root of 16 is 4. So we could substitute that into our 12 plus or minus 4 square root 5 over 16, because that's what square root of 80 is 4 square root 5. Now we can reduce this fraction. Now we can find the biggest number, the greatest common factor of 12, 4, and 16 are 3 whole numbers. And that's the number 4. So you divide all 3 of those whole numbers by 4, and you get 3 plus or minus 1 square root 5, which is just square root 5, over 4. So that would be your final answer. And there's only 5 problems for the work today. The first 2 are review, and you don't have to do all this. They just ask you a couple general questions. And then the 3 problems are 3 problems like I just did. And when you get to that point, you're done. So I really want to see, can you apply what we've done the last couple days? Can you break down the square root of 80 and then simplify that fraction? Can you do these last couple steps right here? I think you can.